Welcome to this video lecture for Understanding Project Management, a Practical Guide, Chapter 3, Stakeholder Planning. So looking at the project lifecycle, we've now are moving into the planning phase. And the first topic to be covered is stakeholder planning, which is the topic for this lecture. Some words about the planning phase, so an introduction to planning. Then two questions. What are the characteristics of the stakeholders? And then how should we engage with the stakeholders? So in terms of introduction to planning, with the initiating phase complete, the next phase is the planning phase. Now, while each of the planning chapters is presented in order, and you can see the order on the right side of the screen, during real life projects, decisions made in one area of planning may affect one or more of the others. So, for example, work that is done during schedule planning may affect the scope. It may affect the budget. It may affect the project team, the quality. Likewise, work done in risk planning could cause a schedule change or a change in the scope. So while these are presented in order, in real life, there is a lot of movement back and forth between the different planning topics. And the outstanding question, how could budget planning impact the scope and schedule plans? Well, this is really a question of constraints that was covered in chapter 1. But during budget planning, if you found that the budget was too high and was going past the overall approved budget from the project charter, this could potentially mean a reduction in scope or adjustment to the schedule plan. So again, much like in constraints, during the planning phase, the different aspects of planning will affect each other. Okay, the first question, what are the characteristics of the stakeholders? Now, as you recall, key project stakeholders were first identified in the project charter. But additional, now that's early in the project. Those are key project stakeholders. Additional project stakeholders should be identified during planning. As we move into more detail, then more stakeholders will become apparent. Now, for each stakeholder, what we should be identifying is their level of power, classified as low to high. Now, level of power refers to a stakeholder's ability to meaningfully impact the project. So a high power stakeholder could uh, cause changes required to the project, or could in the ultimate cancel a project or cause it to need to terminate. Low power stakeholders would not have that ability. Another is their level of interest, which can be from low to high. A high interest stakeholder is one that is very engaged in the project, is interested in it, wants to know information, and is present within the project. A low interest one is the opposite of doesn't have a high degree of engagement and is not interested or worried about the project. The other is the level of support, and this can range from high, neutral, or low. And this is the whether the stakeholder is supportive, is that wants the project to succeed. Some stakeholders very much want stakeholders to succeed. For example, a project sponsor or a customer would normally be highly supportive. Some are neutral, where you have perhaps government agencies or certain employees in an organization may be neutral. They're not really that, not that supportive or unsupportive. And then you can have low support or unsupportive stakeholders. These would be stakeholders that have an interest in the project not doing well. For example, sometimes the general public or activist groups and so on may be actively opposing the completion of a project. So that would be an example of a low level of support or unsupportive. So it's important for each stakeholder to estimate their level of power, interest, and support. We're now going to watch a video which will demonstrate the creation of a new planning document called the Stakeholder Register.
After completing the project kickoff meeting, Sophie starts to think about the planning work ahead. There are so many things to start working on. Her first priority is to create a list of all the stakeholders that she is aware of at this point in the project. The company's CEO, Casey Serador, is the first name on the list. By nature of her role, Casey has an extremely high level of power. Sophie knows from past experience that Casey's interest level is also high. Casey is a hands-on CEO who is fully engaged in the products of her company and is highly supportive of her employees. Next, Sophie adds Arun Singh to the list. As the project sponsor, Arun has a high level of power. Arun will want this project to be successful, and given the high visibility of this project, he will likely be very interested. Sophie can count on a high level of support from him. There will be 3 additional project teams working on the other DecoCam version 4 program projects: development, installation, and technical writing. Sophie has assessed that each of the project managers will possess a fairly high level of power, as their actions and decisions could positively or negatively affect her project. However, she knows that their primary interest will be in their own projects and that therefore they will have a lower level of interest in hers. In terms of support, Sophie expects that they will be neutral. In conversation with Arun, Sophie becomes aware of a potential issue. Jackson Woodhouse, Vice President of Customer Support, is very upset that his project idea, upgraded camera software for a key customer, was bypassed in favor of the photo assistant option. Jackson is an important stakeholder, and Sophie will need the cooperation of a number of people in his department. While Sophie feels his power and interest are high, she is worried about whether he will be supportive of her project. She will do her best to gain his support for the project, but at this point in time she will assume that he will be unsupportive. Catherine Bianchi is well known. Through working with her on a number of projects, Catherine has become a mentor for Sophie, providing feedback and career advice to her. Sophie knows that her power, interest, and support will be high. At this point, there are no team members assigned to Sophie's project, but she knows that this will be changing soon. Part of the planning process is to identify and acquire the necessary team members to complete the project. For now, she adds project team to her list, knowing that she will be able to fill in the names later. Her project team will have a lower level of power compared to other stakeholders. Their interest should be high, and they should also be supportive. It will become an issue later if there are any uninterested or unsupportive team members assigned to the project. Finally, there will be a number of other employees at Deco Productions who will be involved with or affected by the project. For example, they may provide services for or receive certain outputs of the project. In general, they will have a low level of power and interest, and their level of support will likely be neutral. From past experience, Sophie knows that additional stakeholders will become apparent throughout the project, and as they do, she will add them to her list. For now, this is a good start.
Okay, so in terms of creating the stakeholder register, we saw the project manager, Sophie, considering the stakeholders for the project, and she identified the following project stakeholders. Casey Serador, who's the CEO, the project sponsor, Arun. Remember, there are 3 other version 4 projects taking place in the overall program, and the other version 4 project managers are stakeholders. Jackson Woodhouse, he's a specific vice president for customer support. He is somebody that she'll need to rely upon his area. So he and his area are key stakeholders. The project team itself, and finally, Deco Productions employees, in that there will be a number that will be involved there in or affected in some way. You can see the stakeholder register for the case study in the textbook in chapter 3, so you can have a look there. Key idea: project stakeholders should be identified and analyzed to assess their level of power, interest, and support. Okay, we next go on to, at this point now, the next question becomes, well, how are we going to engage with them? And so this is the process of creating the stakeholder engagement plan. So we'll watch this video together.
Sophie considers each of the stakeholders on her list. She asks herself the question, what can I do to effectively engage with them? One of the approaches that has helped her when developing her stakeholder engagement plan is to use empathy to see things from their point of view. Once she does, she can more clearly evaluate their needs and decide how best to approach them. From her past interactions, she knows that Casey is passionate about the quality of her company's products and, above all, values open and clear communication. Sophie stops and thinks about what it would be like to be the CEO of a company, one that she started. With this insight, she jots down a few ideas, including dropping by Casey's office periodically and being ready for the types of questions she tends to ask. Another stakeholder to consider is Jackson. He may be a challenge for Sophie, since his project idea was bypassed in favor of DecoCam version 4, and she is concerned he may be unsupportive of her project. She thinks about how Jackson would likely feel. He has been with the company for many years and likely feels some level of frustration as well as feeling underappreciated by the company. Based on this, Sophie decides that she will seek out his advice during the project and regularly provide positive feedback to his department. She hopes this will increase his level of support for the project. She continues this process with each of the remaining stakeholders.
Okay, so now let's review how we should engage with each of the stakeholders. So consider each of the combinations of stakeholder power and interest. And the question is, how should we approach each combination? Well, in the textbook, there are recommended or general approaches that are recommended for each combination of power and interest. So, for example, in the upper right corner, high power and high interest, the general approach is to pay close attention. These are your high power, high interest stakeholders. They are the most important, so pay close attention. Now, the upper left corner, high power, low interest, these are ones to meet their requirements. They don't want to be as actively engaged, so you won't be quite as engaged as you will with the high power, high interest, but whatever they need, you need to do. The bottom right corner, which is low power, high interest, these are ones where the general approach is to provide information. They're interested. They want information, but they're lower power, so you're not looking for as much of a two-way conversation. It's more of a one-way of providing them information. So that's the key for the lower right. And finally, for the lower left, these are your least important because they're low power, low interest, so you should monitor them. Ensure that they're not changing. Sometimes low power stakeholders can gain power if they assemble or if they, reach out or they become more activated. So you are keeping an eye on them in terms of the monitor approach, but that's it. Key idea, and you can see the stakeholder engagement plan for the case study in the textbook, chapter 3. So key idea, develop a plan to engage with each stakeholder. Now, a question for stakeholder documents. Should the stakeholder register and stakeholder engagement plan be distributed to the stakeholders of the project? And should it be something that is emailed out or posted, where everyone can see it? The answer to this is absolutely not. While most of the other, if not all of the other project documents are freely distributed within an organization for those that need to know, The stakeholder register and stakeholder engagement plan contain highly sensitive information. Is that opinions on stakeholders' level of power and interest and support are there and may be concerning if people saw them, may disagree with them, and so on. If Jackson Woodhouse saw that he was being, assumed to be unsupportive, may take offense to that, as well as your plan for how to interact with people. So this is something that a project manager should keep confidential to themselves, or certainly within the project management team of the project. So key idea, keep the stakeholder register and the stakeholder engagement plan confidential. Some key terminology from this chapter, you can find it in the key terminology section, and the references for the images in this PowerPoint. Thanks for watching.